This is Jerry Fry, audio historian of the Pacific Pioneer Broadcasters. The following is the professional history of a PPB member told by himself in his own words on October the 9th, 2006 in Hollywood. These interviews are being audio taped in order to compile firsthand a living history of the members of our organization and stories of their professional experiences. Many of our members began in what is called now the golden age of radio and television, and this is an attempt to preserve as much data as possible for succeeding generations. This recording is not intended for broadcast without first obtaining permission from the Pacific Pioneer Broadcasters. With me today in Hollywood is Sam LOVULLO. Now, that name may not mean too much to people until I tell them that he's the producer of probably one of the most popular syndicated television programs in all of American television history, Hee Haw. Sam, glad to have you with us today.
Thank you, Jerry.
We sort of start back at the beginning on these things, and let me ask you where you were born, when, and tell me a bit about your growing up period.
I was born in Buffalo, New York. Let's see, September the 30th, 1928. That makes me about 77.
Mm-hmm.
And still going strong, still very much involved in country music. And my parents came to California when I was at the age of 16, left high school, played a little baseball there, played a little football there. And my dad, who was in the restaurant business, opened a restaurant. It's ironic. I went to UCLA, and the restaurant was stone throw from USC.
Really?
So I grew up in the food business, and my folks were from Italy. It was a great little Italian restaurant, and was able to work there and still get my education. And that all happened, as I said, when I was 16, and been a living person, I guess, here in California since then.
Southern California is quite a way from Buffalo, New York. What was the genesis of the move? Do you recall?
I think a lot had to do with the fact that Dad had some personal problems with the in-laws. My dad was a very successful businessman, and everybody from the other side of the family were borrowing money from him, and nobody was paying him back. So he said, look, I think the time has come where I'm going to move away from Buffalo and not have to worry about who I'm going to give money to.
And also cold winters.
Yes. And, of course, Dad was an old accordion player. He was an old vaudeville player, and moved here with aspirations of doing something musically with another family member, and that was my brother, Tony LOVULLO.
Mm-hmm.
And Tony LOVULLO, who go back, was one of the members of the Three Sons, and they, of course, did a lot of recording, My Three, Peg in My Heart and Twilight Time and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, that stemmed by a fact that Eddie Cantor then took an interest in Tony, and, of course, as I've already told you, although my name is spelled LOVULLO, it was Eddie who changed it to LOVELLO. So that was the beginning of our whole musical career. Keeping in mind that when I was in Buffalo, I did a little singing. Most Italians do sing.
Oh, yeah.
I sang with a little band, a little church band, and that kind of thing. And so we were just a musical family, and under the circumstances, I think Dad was looking not only to go into business, but trying to do something for us a la Hollywood style. Brother did well musically, and of course I finally ended up in television.
Did your dad have an Italian restaurant or some other?
It was an Italian restaurant, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I must say that he was such he was an uneducated person, but boy was he a great business-minded person.
Mm.
For example, he believed in no ashtrays on the table. Didn't want people to smoke, not because of not because it was unhealthy for you, but he just felt that there was a lot of traffic outside, and people wanted to get in. And if you served coffee and they smoked, we couldn't get the tables cleaned up enough.
A real practical reason.
Absolutely.
For not smoking. I'll be darned.
Yeah.
Well, not smoking in those days was not particularly the custom, was it? No. So you came to Southern California. You were through high school by then or still in high school?
I went to high school, went to Manual Arts High School on Vermont Boulevard, and played a little football, and was on the baseball team. And baseball has become a part of our life story since then. I played a little baseball at Manual Arts, then went on to Los Angeles City College and played baseball there, and then transferred to UCLA, played a little baseball there at UCLA. In fact, last year I was inducted into the UCLA Athletic Hall of Fame.
Oh, wonderful.
Along with my son, who also was a professional baseball player who went to UCLA and played for the Angels and also played for Detroit and played for the Yankees. And so we're a baseball-minded family.
Boy, I guess you are.
Yeah,
Wow.
We're into it real big.
Now, you were not into radio and television until when?
Well, this
Or were you ever in radio?
A little bit, but more so into television, and this has got a little history behind it. When I got out of college, I graduated as a finance person, and really wanted to go into the brokerage business, stock brokerage business.
Not restaurant?
No.
No.
Well, a lot happened in between. I went into the service. I was in the Korean War, handled all that went along with food service, only because I had experience in the restaurant business.
I see.
Yeah, which kind of saved my life, as a matter of fact. And
Army, Navy, or Air Force?
Army.
Army.
And when I came out, I just felt that the restaurant business was not for me. And I think a lot of it had to do is I just felt that the time had come that Dad shouldn't really rely on me any longer, because he was aging son, wasn't well, and I just didn't want to maintain the restaurant business. I really wanted to get a college education, and I wouldn't be able to accomplish that if I had to stay and conduct the restaurant business.
Sure.
But interesting enough, as the story goes, I came back and made a decision that I was going to finish up with my education, and I did so. And as a finance man, I wanted to go, as I said, into the stock brokerage business, and I was asked to take a preliminary exam to see if I qualify to go into the brokerage business, and I took the test of all places at USC. And I was told that I should really bring a brown bag because it would be an all-day event. Well, by that time I was married, and had been married like a year or so, and one child on the way. When I came out of the examining room, I finished up by 1 o'clock, and I felt, gee, I did real good.
Yeah.
And I'll end up as in the stock brokerage business. But the bottom line is that I got a notice in the mail a couple of days later and said I didn't qualify, and I was highly disappointed.
I'll bet.
And here I was looking to a big future in the financial world. Well, my wife's aunt, who was very heavy into the stock brokerage business, knew that I didn't make it, but she said, I want you to go see my stockbroker. It was Watson and Company. She'll never forget that. But an appointment was made for Monday or Tuesday. On Sunday afternoon, I happened to be looking at the classified ads, and there was the need of a chief accountant at CBS Television, radio and television division at KNXT on Sunset Boulevard, and I believe it's Gower.
Gower, yeah.
Correct. And I thought, gee, well, let me go and answer that ad, and I did so Monday morning. And I should have known better, because that was the turning part of my life and my career. That the moment they saw my qualifications, this young lady said, "Come with me," and I went upstairs to meet the controller. His name was John Minkowski, a Polish Catholic man. And he looked at me and he said, "Son, I'm ready to give you a job. You can become chief accountant of this department. You qualify." But he said, "When can you start?" And I said, "I can't start until Wednesday." He said, "I know what's happening. You're applying for another job, and you probably have an appointment tomorrow," which was Tuesday. And I did.
You did.
So I went, as I told him the truth, and that's been my model of doing things in life. Always tell the truth. Told him the truth. The next day I went downtown, went to the Watson Company, saw this gentleman, and I said to him, I already have a job at CBS. And he says, "What? And you want to work here?" He says, "I'll put you up under a trailer, and you can run up there on a chalkboard, and you can list the stocks, and they're going up and down." And he said, "And you got a job at CBS, and you want this job?" He says, "You got it if you want to." I said, "Well, that's what I felt I went to school for." He says, "Son, I must tell you, go back to CBS, take that job, and when you do, have them deduct X number of dollars from your paycheck, because CBS is going to be the first in the network business to go color.
Oh.
And he was absolutely right.
Oh,
That's exactly what happened. I took the job, and that was the beginning of my television career.
My goodness.
It didn't take long before I was transferred to the big network on Fairfax and Beverly, went into the finance department, and that started my whole life as to how to deal with people, how to understand people, how to accept people. You know, Jerry, once in a while I'm asked to give a talk or two, and I'm a believer in what I call the 3 R's. Well, the R's, not necessarily 3 of them. People want to be rewarded, they want to be received, they want recognition, and above all, if you take the R of religion and wrap it around, that is the way to live.
The whole package.
The whole package. We need that. Well,
now that man at the Watson Company hadn't been honest with you and tried to entice you into his firm, your whole life may have been different.
Yeah, he was honest with me.
Yep.
And today, had he told somebody else, go and buy CBS stock and stuff like that, he'd probably be put into jail.
Yeah,
with
right.
But in this case, he was very upfront and told me the truth, and I accepted it, just like I told the gentleman in the accounting department when I first went to apply for the job. And incidentally, while I was parked on Sunset Boulevard, it was a no parking zone. It's probably the best fine I've ever paid, a $25 fine.
You got a ticket.
I got a ticket. My car was overparked time-wise. But in moving to CBS, this has been my dream to someday to tell the youngsters that learn as much as you can, accept what they got to tell you. Don't have an attitude, that's not going to work. Because at CBS, I learned about film production, I learned about stage production, I learned about videotape. I was there when we were doing Carol Burnett, Red Skelton, and of course Jonathan Winters, which is something I'll talk about in a minute. And thanks to Charlie Kappelman, who's a board member of our organization, who was my mentor. He saw that I really did have, I guess, that ability to comprehend everything as a finance person. The reason that I got involved, and keep in mind I was in the finance department, is that I would go to these various areas and make it clear to them in a very nice way, look, your forms are not right, let's modify your forms. Everything from the various divisions are going to eventually end up in the finance department.
Right.
Let me make it easy for you. So in the process of doing this, I was able to learn that end of the business, which paid off tremendously for me when I ended up in television production. And later on I'll explain that. But interesting enough, it was just being nice to people and accepting what they had and making them not feel inferior, but make them feel that they're important.
You were helping them.
I was, absolutely. So I ended up, interesting enough, in another membership member of our organization, Mort Granis, who was a film director in the film department. He brought me on board, and I worked with him for a while. I worked with Kay Irwin. I've worked with a lot of members that are on this board. But interesting enough, it helped to know all the various components of television. Well, one day there was a notice that was sent by the program executive. It was sent down to us in the videotape department. And he was totally responsible for whether we should erase or keep certain videotapes. In those days we had 2-inch tape.
Yeah.
And the company was forever spending millions and millions of dollars of buying videotape. Well, I did a study, and I came to the realization that a lot of that tape should have been degaussed or erased. And I felt that a lot of those tapes only had one pass. So I thought that the idea of erasing those tapes would save the company a lot of money, so long that you knew what was going on with the recording process with 2-inch tape. I sent him a note, and he asked me if I'd come up to see him. And he was in programming and, of course, in business affairs. And here's the part that was distressing at that time. Then he accepted my note and then asked if I would have lunch with him. And instead of inviting me to the executive boardroom at CBS, which I thought, here I'm becoming a biggie in the business, he invited me to some coffee shop on Fairfax and Beverly Boulevard, not to be seen with me because he was a vice president.
Oh, my goodness.
And I was a nobody.
Yeah.
And he drilled me, and he asked me, are you sure? And can I do this? And can we do this? And can we do... And I said, look, I've done a comprehensive study. Now, you're dealing with somebody that's financially trained. So you're not dealing with a production person per se.
Mm-hmm.
So under the circumstances, I said, trust me. Well, he did. He degauzed a lot of tapes, which were used as backups for live television shows.
Mm-hmm.
He became a hero. He never forgotten that. And one day he said to me, he said, Sam, I think I'm going to ask for you to be transferred into the business affairs department. And Charlie, I was the only non-lawyer that went into that department.
Mm.
And here I'm dealing with the attorneys.
Sure.
And the purpose of my being there was to educate them in their package agreements as to what the delivery requirements are and what do you do in the way of tape. And then, of course, I got to learn about film. I spent some time at Studio Center, learned the nomenclature of film, how it's shot, and so forth.
Sure.
So that was the beginning of my career.
What happened to the programs that were degauzed? Were there other copies available on Kinescope
Oh, yes,
or something?
yes.
Yeah.
The master was kept,
Okay.
and the second copy was kept. But any of the other elements were all degauzed, and
Sure.
we were using the tape.
Only made sense. I mean, that's
Absolutely.
economic sense.
But nobody had the, should I say, the foresight to make that determination. And the two of us became a hero. Well, he became a hero, but never once did I go up and say, hey, you, thanks a lot for my telling you what to do.
Yeah.
But he did transfer me into his department.
Fantastic.
Well, now how did I get in production?
You obviously were not the typical, what we call bean counter. You were a guy who cared about the business, wanted to learn as
Right.
much as possible.
That's it.
And the key of making it appear, and in fact being sincere about it, helping others do their job better.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I think it was the year of 1962. I was in that department. And now I'm getting beyond just being a production person in a business affairs department. I'm also now dealing with talent contracts, which became a very useful tool for me later on when I went in independent and become a producer. And I made mention this earlier today, that every television show that I've done, I've never consulted an attorney. I've done my own contracts. I've done my own accounting, do my own payroll, and done right.
Wow.
And it's like being a one-man orchestra. But of course,
Yeah.
you got to have the right help.
Absolutely.
But as it turned out, one day I was handling a contract for Mr. Bill Larson. Bill Larson, for those you don't know, it was the Larson brothers that owned the Magic Castle.
Mm-hmm.
And Bill was an associate producer on Danny Kaye, Jonathan Winters, and I don't think Carol Burnett, but Red Skelton. And I was handling his contract. In those days, he was getting $1,250 a week. That's a lot of money.
Yes, it was.
In 1962. And I went to Perry Lafferty, who is the program director and producer, and I said, well, this is what Bill wants. He said, don't even offer him anything other than what he's getting. And I said, well, he's pushing me. He wants more money. He says, don't worry about it. Let him go.
Oh, dear.
So when he came in and we negotiated, and he wouldn't accept something more than $1,250, less than $1,250 or $1,250, and he was a friend. He says, Sam, I must tell you, there is nobody in this building that could do my job. I stood up at my desk and I said, Bill, I am going to do your job. And you should have seen the look on his face, because he had completely forgotten that I was brought up in production.
Yeah.
Videotape and film and so forth. So it was a natural thing for me to segue into television production. Well, there was one man that I had to go talk to, and that was Charlie Kappelman.
Kappelman.
And Charlie, as I said, was my mentor. And he goes on to tell the story how we arm wrestled for the job.
Now, Charlie at this point is in charge of all the technical aspects
everything,
of CBS Television
yes.
City.
But he, in some ways, has to find a way to accept who moves into production. Mm-hmm. But he knew I had television production experience based on him helping me out when I was in the accounting department.
Sure.
So it was a natural thing, and I moved into that department. But here's the part that's interesting. I didn't tell my superiors in business affairs that I'm going to accept this job as an associate producer on the Jonathan Winter series.
Mm-hmm.
That was a show, incidentally, that Bill Larson was doing at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So the bottom line is simply this. I went on to be the associate producer. It upset my superior in charge of business affairs, but I was fortunate in a way that Jonathan used to tape his show on Saturdays. So what I would do is I'd go to the script reading on Friday, still maintaining my job in business affairs. On Friday, I would go do the run-through, and on Saturday, we would tape the show, and Sunday was my day off.
Mm.
And, Jerry, what made CBS happy is I never drew a salary for that first year from the Jonathan Winter Show.
Oh, wow.
I drew it from
What a
business
guy.
affairs. So I was doing two jobs at once.
Yeah.
And what was nice about it is that I was doing the budgets for Jonathan Winters.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, Jonathan and I have become very close friends.
I'll bet you have.
He's a dear friend of mine.
Yeah.
When he found out that I was the finance man, he used to come in my office and he would open up my desk drawer and say, I live in Toluca Lake, Sam. I don't have a tennis court. Bob Hope lives next door to me. He's got one. He said, I want you to build my tennis court out of your petty cash.
Is Jonathan as crazy as everyone says he is? Or is he just funny?
Well, that's Jonathan.
Yeah, he's just a real...
Jonathan. There's no in-between. He either dislikes you or he likes you.
Mm-hmm.
And incidentally, you know that he was a semi-regular on Hee-Haw for a year.
That's right.
He came on the show,
mm-hmm.
and he knew my style. And he'd come in, collect a bundle of bucks, but he would just be in Asheville for a week, and I would do 13 shows.
Mm-hmm.
And most people don't know this, but Hee-Haw was done in bits and pieces.
Mm-hmm.
It was not necessarily done on the clock.
Yeah.
We do so many songs, and we'll get into that a little bit, but Jonathan was a dear friend of mine, and I think he's not doing well, or his wife's not doing well.
Mm-hmm.
He lives in Santa Barbara now.
Right.
So at any rate, I'm now doing Jonathan Winters. The second year became one of the co-producers, and Jonathan and I, as I said, became very close, dear friends. A lot of good things came out of that, and I gained a lot of experience of being involved with talent and, of course, with Jonathan. And we knew that Jonathan was not reaching the South. The ratings were okay, but we couldn't capture the South. So the bottom line on this discussion is that Jonathan, as you know, used to do a number of country characters.
Right.
Dress in overalls and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
In order to capture the South, I started to book people like Roy Clark, Buck Owens,
Mm-hmm.
Minnie Pearl, George Goober Lindsay, who was on Andy Griffith,
Mm-hmm.
Roy Rogers, and Dale Evans. And we did take note that they were going strong.
Mm.
And the ratings would go up when we had these country individuals, guests on the show.
Mm-hmm.
So the indicators were there that that's what the South wanted. They wanted to see more country-minded guests. Across the street, if I may add, at NBC, was Laugh-In.
Ah, yes.
All right? And Laugh-In, as you know, had one-liners.
Right.
George Slaughter, my dear friend, who was upset by our success of Hee-Haw eventually.
Uh-huh.
And we brought it to their attention. The difference between Laugh-In and Hee-Haw was that we did have one-liners, but we had music. We were able to separate the comedy with music, and as opposed to one-liners that came at you so quick.
Mm-hmm.
The power of retention wasn't there.
Mm-hmm.
But what we would do is we'd come in with a nice couple of one-liners and give you a song, giving you a chance to relax and, oh, I did understand that joke. So there was the basic difference. So we went on the air after Jonathan was canceled in 1968. We went on the air in 1969. And how did this all happen? Dickie and his brother, the Smothers Brothers, had their own show and had a summer series called The Good Time Hour, which featured Glenn Campbell. And the nature of this business is such that if you got a successful show in the fall, they'll give you a time slot in the summer. So that was where it was all at. Tommy and his brother Dickie had a successful fall show, and they were given the time slot with Glenn Campbell, The Good Time Hour. And interesting enough, by the way, after Hee Haw went on the air, it took a while before Glenn Campbell decided to do my show. And I'll tell you why. Good Time Hour was canceled.
I remember that.
And only because they canceled the Smothers Brothers series.
Yeah.
And Bob Wood, who was the president, made that decision. Told Perry Lafferty, and by this time, I was back again in business affairs for 2 days because Jonathan was canceled. And Perry called me to the third floor at CBS and said, Sam, where are your associates? Well, they're probably across the street at some bar. He said, I just want you to know that Hee Haw is going to be picked up and you're in charge.
Oh, boy.
And you need to go to Nashville. And, of course, Charlie Kappelman did come to Nashville to look over the facilities to be sure we could do it. So you can see how Charlie played a big role in my life.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
I forgot, was the Jonathan Winters show a 30-minute or a 60-minute show?
1 hour.
1 hour.
1 hour.
Yeah.
And interesting enough, my kids were young. I wasn't sure I wanted to do it. I was back again to CBS. So I made a deal with Perry Lafferty. And he just passed away, but he was just a wonderful man to me. I said, Perry, I'm willing to do this. He said, you have no choice, Sam. You got to go. I said, I'm willing to do this, Perry, but I said, I've got a young family. I don't want to leave my family. They're very supportive of what I'm doing. I said, I can't just pick up and leave and join another entity or another organization. So we made a deal. He said, look, we have ownership in the show. And he said, we'll go ahead and loan you to the show. And we'll have them pay you. And, of course, your benefits will be continued on with CBS. So that really was a very helpful.
Yeah, good package.
It was a great package. I couldn't, say no to Perry.
No.
And we went to Nashville, and there again, here it is, the first week of June, and we got to be on the air on June the 19th.
Oh boy,
1969, and that's where the bits and pieces came, because we just didn't have time enough to put a show on the clock from start at 1 o'clock and finish at 2 o'clock.
Sure.
So we decided to, in order to catch up and do it all in editing, we decided to shoot a lot of music, do a lot of cornfields. We decided to do this. We decided to do that. And it worked. And it was a formula that Charlie Kappelman, who later found out, years later, who came to see what I was doing, and I'm quoting him. He says, Sam, you need to copyright what you're doing. He says, you're onto something here. But in those days, Jerry, it was all done manually.
Yeah.
And later on, we did go to the computers, not what we have today, and we won an Emmy Award for electronic editing based on this system.
I'll be darned.
Yeah.
I know. I was so shocked the first time I went through NBC in Burbank and discovered that Hee Haw was done by cutting the videotape with a razor blade.
There you go. That's right.
Laughing, I should say.
Laughing was
Yeah.
it. Yes, right. And we were almost into that area, too. And Charlie, by the way, bless his soul, he was beginning to show me how to cut videotape with a razor blade.
That was quite an art
Yeah.
to make it work.
But anyways, we were a success, and all I can tell you is that after the ratings went sky high, and I'm indeed, I must admit, the critics are the ones who helped make this show a success. For the very obvious, they tore this show apart. They thought we were crazy. Even the talent thought we were crazy.
Yeah.
But what it did is it got an audience to say, you know what? On Sunday night, I'm going to tune in and watch this show. And they stayed with us. And shortly after that, we got word that we were going to be a mid-season replacement. And we did replace the Smothers Brothers Hour.
I read a description about Hee Haw that said, Hee Haw was all cornball, slapstick, TNA, and great country music, and people ate it up. That's true.
That's right.
Yeah, but the music, see, the key ingredient, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Since you mentioned TNA, there's a story that goes with this, and certainly should be a part of this discussion. I didn't realize that we had the Bible Belt. There were followers of the show, and after we were on the air, and incidentally, after the third year, our contract with CBS ran out. Freddie Silverman canceled all the country shows on CBS.
Good old Freddie.
Good old Freddie. And because of my experience with the telephone lines, and so forth and so on, we band together and made a decision that we should go on our own in syndication. And here I was, on the phone, talking to the telephone people, talking to the stations who wanted this show. And that helped us back in 1972. And incidentally, and the rule of thumb was we were our own distributors. We had nobody to distribute the show because they didn't believe in us. But for Sam Lovello to get on the phone and call all the CBS affiliates who knew of me and believed in what we were doing, they accepted the show, and we were on the air. And 85% of our stations in syndication were CBS. And we were on the air the same time, same station, even after we were canceled. But people were accustomed to going to that time, to that station, and just punching their dial, and there we were.
There you were.
But I wanted to tell you, the Bible Belt finally got on us a little bit and said, the TNA and, the low-cut blouses and stuff like that. And so I called my wardrobe design person, who worked with me on Jonathan Winters. His name was Ed Sunley. I said, Ed, look at these letters. I mean, they're really coming in hot and heavy. We've got to do something to dress them up. And he said, you ain't going to tell me how I should dress for these pretty girls. I says, Ed, I know the Daisy Mae outfit and the Duke of Hazzards. It was on the air at that time, too, by the way.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, they copied us a little bit. So I said, I think let's do something. Cover them up just a little bit. Well, he sort of spited me. He went out and bought clothes rather than manufacture them. And I swear that he dressed some of these girls in turtleneck sweaters, practically. I thought, well, let me go on for 13 shows. And incidentally, we used to tape 13 shows in June and 13 shows in September and October. While we were editing 13 and airing 13, we were doing the next 13.
Sure.
And interesting enough, I got positive letters about the girls, how we dressed them, and I also got positive letters that some of the people disliked the fact that we got them out of Daisy Mae outfits.
Really?
And it was a 50-50 split. But I did get one letter from a middle-aged lady, and I shall never forget this. And she said, Mr. Lovello, I have been a regular viewer of your show since it went on the air in 1969. Here we're talking about 5 years later. She says, you should have never done that. You should have never dressed those girls. It was the one thing that my husband needed to look at every Saturday night so he could turn him on.
And here you were, the secret weapon in that household. Didn't even know.
So back again to the cleavage.
Yeah, oh my gosh. Well, you had some real wonderful characters on that show. Where did you find them all? I mean, did you know some of these people personally before that?
It was a combination of things. Some of the people like Grandpa Jones, he would tell me who was good and doing well at the Grand Ole Opry, which, by the way, most people didn't know this because I was an unknown person in Nashville. I used to, on Saturday nights, go to the Grand Ole Opry and hide and hidden. I was hidden always behind the drapes. I didn't want people to know that I was there, just to assess and study the situation. But it's interesting, the stories that were told by these artists, by these country artists, and they're magnificent, they're funny, would be in the green room, so to speak, while they were waiting to go on stage at the Grand Ole Opry on a Friday and Saturday night. And I've always said that what we did eventually, those stories were used on Hee Haw, more or less, but we would put them into a situation, into a set. So we had Archie Campbell, we had Grandpa Jones, Gordy Tapp, who was a Canadian. These folks, they just were loaded with jokes.
Oh, I'll bet.
loaded with stories and jokes. Well, eventually we ran out, so we had to hire a couple of country
some writers.
Yeah, right.
Now, here's a kid from Buffalo of Italian heritage. Where did the interest in country music develop in you?
Well, as I said earlier, I used to go to the opera.
Uh-huh.
And the opera, as you know, is a storyline.
That's true.
And they put the music to the storyline.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what country music's all about. It's a story that is written about one's life. Loretta Lynn, The Pill, Don't Come Home Drinking with That Your Breath, and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then they would add the music to the lyrics. And incidentally, I try to help as many people as I can, particularly those who want to be songwriters. But they make a grave mistake. They're musicians. And what they do, they write the melody first and then try to squeeze in the story to their melody. You got to do it the other way.
Yep.
You got to define your story. Shorten it, get rid of the its and thes and so forth and all. Get to the point and then give it to a musician who will add the music to it. That's the way you write country music.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a natural move. And incidentally, Paul Weston, and certainly this is something that our people in our organization should know, he was our orchestra leader on Jonathan Winters.
No, that's right.
And his wife, as you know, Jo Stafford,
Mm-hmm.
who sang and recorded Shrimp Boats Are Coming. When Paul found out that I was going to the South to do a country show with country music, he said, "Sam, you're crazy. He says, you've got something going for you now here with CBS. You ought to go on to something else here on the West Coast." He says, "No, the opportunity's there. Perry Lafferty's asked me to go, and I'm going to go." Well, here's the part that's interesting. I saw Paul years later on, and he looked at me real funny. I said, "What are you doing, Paul?" He said, "Oh, I'm semi-retired, still trying to do some work." I said, "Paul, I'm still going to the bank."
Yeah. Oh, man. What was there any thought about doing the show in Los Angeles rather than doing it out of Nashville? I mean, I guess you have access to all the artists down there.
Tony Orlando was big as you know, big hit on CBS.
Mm-hmm.
And Tony, incidentally, has done Hee Haw a number of times. And keeping in mind that his show simultaneously was very successful, CBS. And by this time, we were in syndication. And he asked, and called one day and said, "You know, I think I'm having trouble reaching the South with the ratings." Well, a similar problem like Jonathan Winters.
Sure.
So I said, "Well, what would you like for me to do?" And he said, "Bring some of the Hee Haw people," which I did. And I brought Buck Owens, I brought Junior Samples, I brought Minnie Pearl, Grandpa Jones, and they did it as a tribute to Hee Haw, which incidentally the ratings did go up
Mm-hmm.
when that show aired. But there was something there that I noticed, and that is this, that our makeup people at CBS, and I'm by no means, they're doing their job, and they're all creative, very artistic. They were doing so many big things on Junior Samples, cutting his hair and doing this and doing that. And, you know, and of course, Ronnie Stoneman, our female banjo player, they wanted to know the size of her bra. And they called her back there before we came here, and she said, "Give me a child size." You know, that kind of thing. And keep in the humor. But when they got here, they were lost.
No.
They were just, I think they were frightened, they were scared.
Sure.
Plus one other thing, too, and I may add, there was one thing that I never did in the South or on Hee Haw, and it wasn't a money problem. I never had fruit baskets, never had liquor, never did anything to these artists in their dressing room. It was cold, a chair and a sofa and a mirror, that kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And they wanted to be like us.
Sure.
And the reason? I never did it for my people, and I wouldn't do it for the artists. In fact, people like Ethel Merman, who called and wanted to be on the show. People like Sammy Davis Jr. called and wanted to be on the show. Ed McMahon. I mean, you cannot believe the non-country people who wanted on the show. Ray Charles.
Oh, my gosh.
Ray Charles. If you saw the Ray Charles movie, some parts of it is a little bit of what happened on Hee Haw. Believe me. And Ray and I became friends. And I could only tell you, when Ray came to do the show the first time, believe it or not, he came with his entire entourage. Makeup, his orchestra leader, music sheets, and the whole thing. I said, trust me.
We don't work that way.
We don't do it that way. Just trust me.
Yeah.
We'll make it work. We'll make it work. All we want to do, rehearse once, and then we tape it, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're not going to rehearse more than once, and we're going to do it. And if you blow it and you don't like it, we'll do it again. And what's interesting is that when Ray Charles came into Nashville to do it the first time, the first show, every musician in Nashville was there.
I'll bet.
They wanted to see Ray
him.
Charles.
Sure.
And during the first rehearsal, as we were coming to the bridge, he stopped. And he said, wait a minute, Sam, I want to talk to these musicians of yours. He got up and said, hey, you guys, you're holding back. You're holding back. Forget who I am. I know you guys, what you're doing. You're just intimidated because of me. Just forget it. Let's go and do it. That was the best performance ever happened.
I'll bet it
Ever happened.
Now, you would tape several numbers with each artist and then use them in different shows?
Yes, and I would have to follow the rules of AFTRA and pay them. Yeah,
sure.
That all depends, Jerry, on how they felt about doing more shows.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them were apprehensive about doing the cornfield. I think earlier I told you how Henny Youngman didn't want to do the cornfield, but I finally got him to do it.
Finally got him to do it, yeah. Very cleverly.
Yeah. So, and then from that point on, Ray Charles, I mean, he just was a hee-haw person. As a personal note, he loved Sam LOVULLO. And I tell you why. He used to carry a black flask with black coffee.
Mm-hmm.
And the moment he would surface in the studio, he'd send somebody, go get Sam. And I'd go and he'd hand me the black coffee. And I used to spike it with Jack Daniels.
Yeah. Well, good for you.
And nobody knew. It was just strictly between he and I.
I understand if Sammy Davis Jr. had done the show, he would forego the coffee.
Well, yeah, oh, well. You know that Sammy Davis, I got photos of Sammy Davis cooking black-eyed peas.
Really?
Yes, because he had heard so much about our lunches. We used to cook our own lunches out there by the Grand Ole Opry stage. And he's out there steering the big pot with the beans and stuff. And incidentally about Sammy Davis, when he first came to do the first show, it was he that told his entourage, you guys lay off. You heard Sam, and I want listen to Sam, and Sam will see. It's because of believing in you as an individual. If you tell the truth, they'll try you out.
Sure.
But what did happen is when I scheduled him, I had scheduled Roy Clark later in the day, and Sammy, figuring that he would do 1 or 2 or 3 songs, and he did a whole bunch of them. Do you know what he did after he finished the 4th song? He says, Sam, I am not doing any more. Get Roy Clark on the phone. I want Roy to accompany me on this next song.
Huh.
And I had to get Roy out of the hotel before his scheduled time.
For heaven's sake.
So that's an indication of what this show was all about.
Now, where did you actually tape the show?
We did it at the CBS affiliate. At that time was KLAC.
Mm-hmm.
It is now KTVF. It's still there. And then the latter part of 1979, we moved to the Grand Ole Opry. They had better facilities, more updated cameras and things.
The new Opry.
The new Opry, right, exactly. Yeah. And there was more room. And incidentally, Charlie Kappelman and I today, we were talking about one of our lighting directors, one of the top lighting directors on CBS. His name was Lair Davis, who's now deceased. Lair was a great worrier. He used to work with me in all my shows. And he says, Sam, you're making a horrible mistake in moving from a small matchbox studio to a big studio, and you're going to get the same look, but it's going to cost you more money. I've got to get more lights and stuff. And he was right.
He was.
He's absolutely right. Yeah. So it's been a wonderful run.
Roy Clark and Buck Owens were living in Nashville at that time?
No.
No.
Roy lived in Tulsa, and Buck, as you know, lived in Bakersfield. And incidentally, it was sad to see this man leave.
Oh, yeah.
He was a big contributor in country music.
Performed right up to the end, apparently.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And Roy, incidentally, is still performing, still on the road, and just been ill with a hip problem, and he's going to have. He just had a hip replacement.
Most of the others are gone, I think. Grandpa Jones is gone, and Junior Samples.
Junior Samples gone.
Gone.
There's an interesting story about Junior Samples. He was telling a fish story in Atlanta, which eventually became a big hit for him on an RCA record.
Really?
And Archie Campbell is the one who introduced and brought Junior to my office. And Archie was very close to Chet Atkins, and Chet Atkins was running RCA at that time. And in comes this guy with this big overalls, big, gigantic guy. And at first, I never sloughed people off. That's not my routine. I listened to the man. You never know when you're going to learn something. But when he sat down, I could tell that he had a red sock and a green sock. And I thought, gee, what's this all about?
Christmas time.
So he said, he said, when I'm driving my car, he says, my wife tells me, use the red sock because I'm supposed to stop and use the green sock that tells me to go.
Oh, my gosh.
But you know what? He never had an education, but he knew how to sign a check.
Oh, yes. I'll bet. Now, were you living in Nashville at the time, or were you commuting?
I was living in Los Angeles, and then eventually bought a place, a condo in Nashville. Here it is, Junior Samples' biggest quote, and I've kept this in my telephone book. Here it is, right here.
Oh, for heaven's sake!
If you mind, I hope you not running out of tape. It says, "The 300-pound country bumpkin isn't as dumb as he pretends." He says, "It's my image. A rumor got started years ago that I couldn't read or write. When anybody asks if that is the truth, I tell them I can read well enough to know the amount of my paycheck and write well enough to endorse it at the bank."
Good for you. Now, we've talked about a lot of things, but we haven't talked about your personal life. Your wife, you mentioned you got married early?
Got married, yes. Lovely wife, a good family. Her name is Grace. And we married 52 years ago. We just a couple of years ago celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary.
Wonderful.
I got 4 lovely kids, 2 boys and 2 girls. They're grown, raising their own family. I may add that my wife and my family have been very supportive. I don't think you all know this, but I wrote a book.
No.
It was out just a couple of years ago, and I gave all of the earnings from the book to the Catholic convent in Nashville, Tennessee. It's called My 25 Years in the Cornfield.
Oh, very nice.
And I'll send you one at home.
Gee,
yeah,
that's wonderful.
You too, Frank. And it's now been recorded, I think, in the Library of Congress because, unlike most people, this book didn't have anything in there that was alarming. There was nothing about my show or me that was dirt, so to speak, that'd sell a lot of books. We were just family, and we got along. You've heard rumors that Buck and Roy didn't get along. They certainly did get along, believe me. But this book has in the back of it every show, the air date, and every artist that was on that show.
Gee.
I taped 585 shows. We were on the air from 1969 till we went off the air in 1995, almost 10 years, 10 years or so. And we were never preempted. There was never an act of God to get us off the air. The show was in demand. In addition to that, there's a section in the back of the book. Every person who worked with me, from associate producers, writers, and the year that they worked with me, they're listed in the book.
Gee, what a wonderful record.
Yeah, and it's just... And I did it myself because I'm as an old finance man, I kept good records. But back to my family. Yes, my book will tell you I missed, a lot of baptisms. I missed a lot of graduations and things of that sort. But I was dedicated to the show and dedicated to the people. Never functioned, incidentally, from my office with a television monitor so I could see what's going on. I was always on the floor. Always on the floor. It's a way of showing them that
you care.
I care. And if it doesn't work, we'll let you. It's interesting. I got a call one day. Not a call. They came in to see me on the floor and said, "We have to clear the studios." And I'm saying, "For what reason?" This is a bomb scare. And by the way, we never had tickets to come in to see the show. Anybody that came off the street, go talk to the guard, and you were sent through to see the shows.
I bet you had a full house every time.
Every time.
Yeah.
And here we are with a bomb scare. And I didn't panic. I said, well, how much time I have? You got to do it now. This is security. It's okay. Get to it. So I just nonchalantly went on to do my business. We finished the song. It was about 11:30. Went in the control room where usually I spent most of my time. And I said to the director, I said, I think we ought to go to lunch 11:30 today. He looked at me and he said, wait a minute. We normally don't go to 12 o'clock. Let's go to lunch. Let's go to lunch early. Let's give the talent an extra half hour. And they thought I was crazy.
Mm-hmm.
But I never told anybody that this was happening. We cleared the studio. And I told everybody, report back about 1:30, 2 hours later. You know what? Nothing happened. You know, it just...
Yeah.
And that's the only time that I can remember that we ever had something scary happen to us on the show.
Mm.
So...
You've had a fantastic career and have met so many interesting people that I don't know how you keep them all straight.
Well, again, back to my family, I think you all know I had... One of my sons is working for Warner Brothers. He's working on some shows.
Mm-hmm.
My other son was a professional baseball player. He played for the Angels, and then about 5 years ago, I had back surgery and was offered a job. He belonged to the Cleveland Indians, and he now is managing, and he's coming up the ranks, and he's in AAA as a manager. In fact, if you all follow sports, he was interviewed by the Dodgers when they were looking for a manager last year.
Mm-hmm.
So that looks very promising. One of my daughters is into tennis. She's a tennis instructor. Works at a country club in Northridge.
Mm-hmm. And
my other daughter is in interior design. And my wife is a great shopper. If you want to find her, she's either playing bingo or she's in the mall.
But nobody's serving Italian meals in a restaurant anymore in the LOVULLO.
Well, you know what? I do the cooking.
Do you?
I love to cook.
Oh, yeah,
well, it comes from being an Italian family and so forth.
Absolutely. Well, Sam, it's been a great pleasure talking with you. And anything more that we need to put on the history of the LOVULLO life?
Well, first of all, I am so delighted to be a part of the Pioneer Broadcasting Association. Only God knows how many people have asked me to be a part of other organizations, but they could never pin me down because I'm sort of in and out of town.
Sure.
And when they call and ask if I would be on this board, which I'm delighted to be a part of, I made it clear, I'm still bouncing around. I'm still going back and forth. And so I'm trying to work out my schedule and so forth. And maybe to some extent I'm being a bit selfish. I think I'm very close to maybe someday going into the Country Music Hall of Fame.
Mm-hmm.
I served on the CMA board, the Country Music Association board, the Gospel Association board, the Hall of Fame. I've been in all of them.
Sure.
And I have served my time, and I'm a believer in country music, and I'm a believer in the people who are trying to do some good with these organizations. Just recently, and I hope we're not running on the tape, I was honored by the Daughters of American Revolution in Texas.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
Just happened last March. And I thought, what do they want out of me?
Mm-hmm.
And this is the first time that they've had somebody that was a military person. And that evening, Mrs. Bush, actually they're from Texas, she was supposed to be there, but there was a rainstorm and didn't make it. So she sent a wire or something of that nature and apologized for not being there. Well, when I heard that, I went back up to my hotel room, and this was in San Antonio, Texas. And I thought, I need to change some things around here a little bit. So when I got down and accepted the award on behalf of not only me but all of us, I said, I wish Mrs. Bush was here today because I've got a gripe with the White House. And there's 1,000 ladies out there, the Hyatt Regency Hotel, and in Texas, it takes a little guts to do that because
so.
The Bushes are from Texas.
Sure.
They all stunned. And I said, well, let me tell you what the problem is. I said, I did a CMA award show at Constitution Hall in Washington, D.C. when Reagan was the president and Father Bush was the vice president. And I said, we had to separate them because of security. And I said, when the Oak Ridge Boys got up, and I had every country artist was there. I said, when the Oak Ridge Boys got up there, and they were singing Elvira, Elvira, papa, papa, you know that part of it?
Sure.
I noticed up in the wings where Father Bush was, he was sitting up there, and he was going, papa, 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 papa. And I said to the cameraman, I had my headset, get him, quick. Get a shot on him right now, quick. And they did. Let me tell you what happened out of that shot. When Father Bush ran for president, now I'm telling these ladies a story. When Father Bush ran for president, they wanted to show that he loved country music. And guess what they did? They used that shot of where he was going, papa, 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 papa. And I said, ladies, he became president, and the Bush family never gave me residuals for using it.
Oh, fantastic. On that happy note, we'll say goodbye. Sam, it's been a pleasure talking with you,
thanks,
as I said.
I enjoyed it.
This has been the autobiography of Sam Lovello, bean counter par excellence and producer of one of the most magnificent, and raunchy, some would say, and yet most popular television shows in history. Hee-haw. This has been recorded in Hollywood on October the 9th, 2006. I'm Jerry Fry, audio historian of the Pacific Pioneer Broadcasters. Thank you for listening.